Lord Latimer's Ladies by Margaret Elin Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin. Chapter 20. Brian Makes a Choice. Ella addressed the other ladies with a confidence that would have startled anyone who hadn't seen her bloom under the restorative properties of the pun. We are most certainly not going to let Lord Latimer die from the mere lack of pig parts, are we? She spoke as if it were only reasonable, and there was a general consensus that no one, of course, was going to do that. So, who will be the fortunate one? Who shall give up her reputation and future prospects for matrimony by becoming betrothed to Lord Latimer for a night? Pig parts? Brian echoed, a beat or two behind. He was shocked by Eliza's pragmatic response. His limited research into ladies of the early 1800s had included a lot of information about their delicate sensibilities and tendency to faint. He'd expected some gasps when Eliza mentioned the innards of a pig, or at least a look or two of consternation, but they had all managed pig parts with brutal ease. He wondered if it was because he had been accepted into their club. Maybe the fluttering and fainting was all performative. He thought this cool-headed dive into the facts of life was the sort of thing usually hidden from male eyes. "Hush, Brian," said Alice, confirming his suspicions. "Just let them figure it out." Brian sat down, as if to watch a sporting event, which, in a way, it was. Grinning in a light-hearted way she had not previously shown to the company, Lenora opened the deliberations, perhaps with an eye to the possible commercial implications. "Allow me to advance my candidacy," she said. She turned to face what now he was thinking of as the spectators section and seemed to be waiting for his response. So Brian waved a lacy sleeve at her in a go-ahead gesture. She continued, "As a widow, I have already married once to please my family. It is expected that any marriage I have now will be solely to please myself. I have no immediate family to disapprove of my choice of an eccentric, and no one to care if he abandons me. My fortune is my own, but I am not permitted to manage my late husband's business as I would please. I confess, I would not object to having the lands here under my charge, and the sheep on them to add to my security. Truly, I cannot imagine there might be any discomfort should the matter become known. It would not harm my reputation to be jilted by such a wealthy suitor, and indeed might enhance it." "I feel like I should be taking notes," Brian muttered to his sister. "I am certain this is going to be the only time where three beautiful women take turns arguing over you," said Alice, almost without moving her lips. "So, shh, pay attention, you might learn something." And she discreetly kicked his ankle. Entering into the spirit of the thing, Iris spoke up. "I do have a certain position in society," she pointed out rather modestly. "A young lady of my social standing could easily withstand any scandal that might arise from such a situation." Her smile became speculative, and her blue eyes gleamed at some imagined scene. "Indeed," she murmured dulcetly, "I conceive of a few ways in which my social cachet might be enhanced if such a story were to get out. She snared a reclusive lord in a weekend, but he vanished without a trace." "Very promising indeed." Not to be outdone, Eliza put forward her own notion. My father's lands are nearest to the castle, and my family, though not so well off as Mrs. Tucker's, nor nobly born as Lady Patton's, is one of the best known in these parts. As such, I would be in the best position to deal with whatever consequences arise here in the castle, after his lordship and Lady Alice make their departure. Round 1 over, the ladies continued with round 2. Leonora appealed directly to Brian. My lord, you asked me about sheep. Clearly you see the potential that this estate possesses. I know how an estate can be managed and its wealth multiplied. If you have read Adam Smith, Brian nodded. Well, I am too familiar with his works, and those of his disciples as well, my lord, Leonora finished in a rush. I could make this estate shine. Displaying a hitherto hidden competitiveness, Eliza rushed in to say, my lord, in a bold voice that seemed to startle her. My lord, she continued in something closer to her usual tone, you have suggested a world where the interconnectedness of God's creations is well known and studied. For that and your kind words in other instances, I thank you, and would gladly consent to be a dutiful wife, if only for appearance, and only for one night. God knows you're not dull, Iris said, but unlike the other women, she had not pressed forward. Though she was looking at him, Brian got the distinct sense that she was speaking almost to herself. No one, it could honestly be said, has ever been to an after-dinner gathering such as this. You're not like any of the men I've ever met in London. And in a world of self-satisfied smug men, her words lost some of their polite tones fit for society and became a bit more cynical. Your words and actions have touched me both in my heart and mind like no other. She loftily waved her lace handkerchief at him, brushing away the unexpected emotion as if it were a gnat. Aside from your proposal, of course, that was atrocious. Her words were severe, but there was something in her expression that let him know she was only teasing. If I agreed to be your wife, you'll have to come up with something better. I shall be happy to write a few suggestions for you. I too could help in that regard, said Leonora. I confess, I also have some possible ideas to improve in that area, said Eliza, none, alas, involving rabbits. Oh, brother, murmured Alice, and nudged said brother in the rib cage with her elbow. Well, Brian, she said brightly, what do you think? The dessert tray had long since arrived, and Alice took this opportunity to stroll over to help herself. Yes, Lord Latimer, said Iris with a twinkle in her eye. What say you? Who shall be your purported bride? Your passport home, Leonora added. Your one and only, if only for one small time, finished Eliza. This feels weird, said Brian, understandably. He paused to gather his thoughts. I get what you are saying, Lady Patton, Miss Spencer, and Mrs. Tucker, about being well suited to withstand and or fix up any complication that might arise from our departure. While I agree that either Miss Spencer or you, Mrs. Tucker, seem admirably well suited to the task you alluded to, I'm afraid I really don't care what happens here to the castle or the lands after Alice and I leave. Each of them blinked at him in surprise. Alice, who usually thought of herself as responsible for everyone in her orbit, said, But we aren't the only ones trapped here, in an under voice. Brian didn't seem to notice. There is one exception. I would like to think there might be some kind of good that might accrue to the lady who consents to be my wife. Someone who actually seems to like me. Someone who can discern between the fiction of a betrothal and the fact of what I can actually offer. And someone whose life I might make better, if only for a little while. Iris smiled, and as Brian crossed the floor to stand in front of her, she grew quite radiant. The other two ladies retreated gracefully. Brian dropped to one knee. In his 19th century clothing, the move actually looked good, but the floor inconveniently creaked beneath the weight of drama. His hand went to the small pocket in his waistcoat, and he took out the neat packet of silver paper which Alice had given to him before dinner. "Lady Iris," Brian began formally, "I know we have only just met, but would you do me the most signal honor of accepting my proposal, subject to whatever changes in dialogue you might propose?" "My lord," replied Iris, "it is with the profoundest sense of delight that I accept your proposal." Brian stood. Lord and lady looked for a moment into each other's eyes. Brian leaned forward slightly and gave her the softest of kisses. Lady Iris smiled. "Safe travels home, my lord," she said. "Thank you," he replied. "Three cheers for the engaged couple," said Alice from over by the desserts. And Eliza and Lenora both dutifully cheered in as ladylike fashion as possible. There was a pause, a palatable moment of expectation, while a room full of people waited for two members of the party to be suddenly whisked away in a cloud of magical time travel sparkle dust. That did not happen. In fact, nothing happened for quite a long time, except the silence spread out until nothing but the creaks and groans and rattles of an old building in a damp environment could be heard. The silence grew awkward. Finally, Alice broke it. "We should remember," she said, turning to her brother, even though it was clear she was actually addressing everyone, "whatever it was that brought us back 200 years, it waited till we were asleep to do this thing. I'm sure it will be the same now that we've solved the puzzle and they have to send us back." That thought was greeted with general relief. Eliza and Lenora went to congratulate Iris, and Alice gave her brother a hug that neither of them expected. In an odd sort of way, a curious bond had formed among the five people. They found a certain level of comfort in their collective company, and the gathering lasted for a few hours more in what was probably the smallest and most unusual engagement party ever held within those walls or that century. The servants brought champagne, and the ladies asked innumerable questions about the small details of 21st century life. Brian actually enjoyed himself, and knowing that he would wake in his own time with access to plenty of insulin, he celebrated his success with a double helping of dessert from the tray, and in response to the rise in blood sugar, his pump gave him an extra helping of insulin from his ever-dwindling supply. End of Chapter 20, Lord Latimer's Ladies, by Margaret Elin Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin. Read by Dan McLaughlin. 2024.